The photograph sat innocently on the mantelpiece, a seemingly perfect captured moment, yet within its cheerful frame lurked a chilling secret, a silent testament to a truth far darker than its smiling subjects implied. A young woman, her eyes sparkling with a youthful exuberance, stood beside an older man, his arm draped casually over her shoulders. His smile was benign, almost grandfatherly, but the way his fingers curled, the subtle possessiveness of his touch against her worn cardigan told a different story to anyone who truly looked. It was a detail so minute, so easily dismissed, and yet in retrospect, it was the key, the first ominous whisper of a story that would unravel with devastating precision. This is the story of Sarah, a vibrant and fiercely independent young artist whose world revolved around brushstrokes, canvases, and most importantly, her beloved grandmother, Eleanor. Sarah's studio, a sun-drenched attic space filled with the scent of oil paint and turpentine, was her sanctuary, a place where her vivid imagination took flight. She channeled her boundless energy into her craft, creating pieces that spoke of life, color, and an enduring optimism. But beneath the creative veneer lay a deep, unwavering devotion to her family, particularly to Eleanor, who had practically raised her. Eleanor wasn't just a grandmother. She was a confidant, a mentor, and the steady, comforting anchor in Sarah's sometimes chaotic artistic life. Their bond was forged through years of shared laughter, quiet conversations over countless cups of tea, and an unspoken understanding that transcended generations. Sarah cherished these moments, drawing strength and inspiration from Eleanor's wisdom and resilient spirit. Eleanor, at 82, had always been a formidable woman, sharp-witted, fiercely independent, and possessed of a memory like a steel trap. She ran her small cottage with military precision, her garden blooming with an almost defiant vibrancy, and her mind as keen as any person half her age. But lately a subtle shift had begun to ripple through the placid waters of Eleanor's routine. It started innocently enough, a forgotten appointment, a misplaced set of keys, the kind of minor lapses anyone might experience. Sarah, ever attuned to Eleanor's rhythms, initially dismissed these as harmless signs of aging, another gentle reminder of the passage of time. However, the small memory lapses began to escalate. Conversations would loop back on themselves, details would blur, and Eleanor, usually so open and forthcoming, began to exhibit an uncharacteristic secretive streak. Sarah would arrive for their weekly Sunday lunch to find Eleanor unusually flustered, her answers vague, her eyes darting away when pressed about her day. There was an air of distraction about her, a subtle unease that Sarah couldn't quite pinpoint but felt with growing clarity. It was as if a delicate thread had begun to fray in the otherwise perfectly woven tapestry of Eleanor's life. Sarah, with her artist's eye for detail, couldn't ignore these subtle dissonances. She noticed a new hesitancy in Eleanor's voice, a slight tremor in her hand when she poured tea, and a subtle defensiveness whenever Sarah inquired about her recent activities or new acquaintances. One afternoon, Sarah found a stack of unfamiliar documents on Eleanor's kitchen table, quickly covered with a tea towel by her grandmother as Sarah walked in. "Just old bills, dear," Eleanor had said, her voice a little too breezy, her smile a little too wide. But Sarah had caught a glimpse of official-looking letterheads, something about investments and property. It was unlike Eleanor to be so guarded, so evasive. Her grandmother had always been meticulously organized, open about her affairs, even seeking Sarah's opinion on practical matters. This newfound secrecy, coupled with the increasingly frequent memory lapses, sparked a quiet alarm within Sarah. The gentle current of concern slowly morphed into a tide of unease, washing over her with every new anomaly she observed. She began to watch Eleanor more closely, her artist's eye now focused not on beauty and composition, but on the subtle cracks appearing in the facade of her grandmother's normally robust independence. She knew deep down that something was profoundly wrong, and she was determined to uncover the truth, whatever it might be. This was just the beginning of a journey that would test Sarah's resolve, challenge her perceptions, and ultimately force her to confront a hidden menace lurking in the shadows of her grandmother's life. Before we delve deeper into Sarah's perplexing journey and the sinister truth hidden within that seemingly innocent photograph, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our captivating stories. Your support helps us bring more compelling narratives like this to life, stories that often lie just beneath the surface of everyday life, waiting to be uncovered. The subtle shifts in Eleanor's routine, once easily dismissed as age-related quirks, began to coalesce into a pattern Sarah found increasingly unsettling. At the heart of this evolving mystery was Arthur, Eleanor's new neighbor, a man who had seemingly materialized from thin air a few months prior, now an ever-present fixture in her grandmother's life. Arthur was, by all accounts, outwardly charming. His silver hair was always impeccably combed, his clothes neatly pressed, and his smile, though frequent, held an almost practiced quality that grated on Sarah's artistic sensibilities. He'd arrived with a story of relocating for a quieter life, seeking solace after a vague, unspecified loss, and had quickly ingratiated himself with Eleanor, offering help with groceries, gardening, and even fixing a leaky faucet, tasks Sarah usually handled. Eleanor, usually so discerning, had taken to Arthur with an enthusiasm that bordered on infatuation. She spoke of him constantly, praising his thoughtfulness and dependability, often at the expense of Sarah's own efforts. "Arthur helped me with the garden today, dear. He really understands roses, unlike some people," she'd remarked one afternoon, a veiled jab that stung Sarah more than she let on. The relationship seemed to intensify with alarming speed. Arthur wasn't just a helpful neighbor. He was now accompanying Eleanor to doctor's appointments, managing her mail, and even suggesting adjustments to her investment portfolio, areas Sarah had always carefully overseen. This growing attachment, coupled with Arthur's increasing proximity to Eleanor's financial decisions, raised a red flag in Sarah's mind, a small flicker of unease that steadily grew into a burning suspicion. Previously, Eleanor had been meticulously organized with her finances, a trait Sarah admired and respected. Now, explanations for bills seemed vague, requests for money from Eleanor became more frequent, and there was a new, almost defensive secrecy about her bank statements. When Sarah politely inquired about a significant withdrawal she noticed from Eleanor's checking account, her grandmother's response was uncharacteristically sharp. "Arthur helped me with something. It's entirely my business, Sarah. You always worry too much." Arthur, for his part, maintained an air of benevolent concern, always ready with a comforting word or a plausible explanation. He'd often be present during Sarah's visits, his presence a subtle barrier, his conversation steering away from any sensitive topics. He exuded an aura of trustworthiness that, ironically, made Sarah trust him less. His smooth transitions from discussing Eleanor's health to mentioning a new investment opportunity he was helping her explore felt calculated, his persuasiveness a finely honed instrument. Eleanor's vulnerability, her increasing reliance on him, became a palpable weight in the room, threatening to smother any lingering semblance of her former independence. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Arthur was slowly, skillfully inserting himself into every facet of Eleanor's existence. Driven by a fiercely protective instinct, Sarah tried to gently probe Eleanor about Arthur and the sudden changes in her financial habits. She approached the subject with utmost care, choosing moments when Arthur wasn't present, attempting to frame her questions as concerns for Eleanor's well-being. "Grandma, I just want to make sure you're comfortable with Arthur handling so much of your personal information," Sarah began one afternoon, trying to keep her tone neutral. Eleanor, however, reacted with surprising indignation. Her eyes narrowed, the easy smile she usually reserved for Sarah replaced by a stern expression. "Arthur is a godsend, Sarah. He truly cares for me. You're being overly protective and distrustful, just like your father warned you about. You always think the worst of people." The accusation stung deeply. Eleanor had rarely spoken to her with such harshness. It was clear that Arthur's influence had already taken root, subtly twisting Eleanor's perception, making her resistant to any perceived criticism of him. Despite the setback, Sarah knew she couldn't abandon her grandmother to what felt like an increasingly dangerous situation. She decided to delve deeper, to independently investigate Arthur's background, hoping to find something that would either quell her anxieties or, more likely, confirm her growing suspicions. Her initial attempts were rudimentary, focused on online searches. She scoured public records, local news archives, anything that might shed light on Arthur's past and particularly his claims of a quieter life after an unspecified loss. The internet, however, yielded surprisingly little. There was no extensive digital footprint, which in itself was peculiar for someone of his purported age and background, suggesting either a deliberate effort to remain anonymous or a life lived far from digital scrutiny. This lack of information only deepened Sarah's unease. A man who appeared out of nowhere, seemingly without a past, and quickly gained such intimate access to her grandmother's life and finances felt less like a benevolent neighbor and more like a carefully constructed facade. The more Eleanor dismissed her concerns, the more Sarah's resolve solidified. She began to subtly monitor Arthur's routine, observing his comings and goings, the duration of his visits, the types of people he interacted with. She noticed he seldom had visitors of his own, and his phone calls, when he took them outside, were always hushed, his voice low and indistinct. Each observation, each unanswered question, chipped away at the veneer of Arthur's charming helpfulness, revealing an undercurrent of something far more sinister. Sarah's artistic eye, accustomed to seeing beyond the surface, now perceived the subtle shifts in Eleanor's posture when Arthur was near, the way her grandmother would sometimes glance at him before answering a question, a flicker of something akin to fear or deference in her eyes. This was no longer just about guarding Eleanor's finances, it was about protecting her very spirit, which Arthur seemed intent on slowly, systematically eroding. The picture, if she could just find it, might hold a clue. Sarah's initial forays into Arthur's background, though seemingly fruitless to Eleanor, had yielded a disquieting collection of minor discrepancies for Sarah. He spoke of a varied career, citing stints in real estate, antique dealing, and even a brief period as a cruise ship entertainer. Each story, when cross-referenced with public records or casual online searches, had a peculiar slipperiness to it. Addresses he claimed to have lived at either didn't exist in the time frame he stated or belonged to entirely different individuals. The antique shop he'd supposedly run in a neighboring town had no trace of his ownership, only a long-established family business by another name. He was a chameleon, it seemed, his past shifting just enough to avoid direct contradiction, yet never quite solidifying into a verifiable truth. These inconsistencies gnawed at Sarah, a persistent hum of unease beneath the surface of Eleanor's cheerful descriptions of her new friend. Beyond the subtle deception, Sarah began to observe a more insidious pattern. Arthur was systematically isolating Eleanor. Her weekly bridge club, a sacred ritual for decades, suddenly became an infrequent occurrence, often canceled at the last minute due to a sudden engagement with Arthur. Her calls with old friends, once lengthy and frequent, grew shorter, sometimes interrupted by Arthur's booming voice in the background, offering an excuse for Eleanor to cut the conversation short. He subtly discouraged visits from neighbors, always having an outing planned or claiming Eleanor was resting. Sarah herself found her visits increasingly orchestrated, Arthur often present, his gaze lingering, making her feel like an intruder in her own grandmother's home. Eleanor, once so independent and socially vibrant, seemed to shrink, her world contracting to the narrow confines of her house and Arthur's omnipresent influence. This deepening isolation was mirrored by a worrying decline in Eleanor's physical and mental well-being. What had begun as occasional forgetfulness now manifested as significant confusion. She misplaced important documents, forgot appointments, and sometimes struggled to recall recent conversations. Her once impeccable appearance grew neglected. Her clothes were often rumpled, her hair unkempt. Arthur, ever the solicitous caretaker, explained these changes away as just old age, or a bit of a cold. But Sarah saw a more rapid and concerning deterioration. Eleanor, a woman who had always prided herself on her sharp mind and active lifestyle, was fading. Her independence slowly eroded by the twin forces of her declining health and Arthur's increasingly dominant presence. Arthur's control became more pronounced, subtly tightening its grip around all aspects of Eleanor's life. He began to manage her medications, dispensing them himself, always with a reassuring smile, but never allowing Sarah to see the bottles or dosages. He handled all her mail, claiming to organize it for her, and answered her phone calls, often screening them before passing them to Eleanor, if he passed them at all. Sarah's direct calls to Eleanor would ring unanswered, only for Arthur to call her back hours later from Eleanor's phone, stating Eleanor was resting, or she's just not up for talking right now. The digital realm was no different. Eleanor's email, which she rarely used, remained dormant, never responding to Sarah's increasingly desperate messages. Sarah's frustration mounted, a burning knot in her chest. She found herself banging against invisible walls, her attempts to communicate with Eleanor constantly intercepted or dismissed. Each conversation with Arthur felt like navigating a minefield, his polite but firm resistance deflecting every inquiry. "She's fine, Sarah, really, just a little tired. You worry too much," he would say, his voice smooth as silk, yet laced with an undeniable undercurrent of dismissal. Sarah felt helpless, unheard, and increasingly alienated from the grandmother she adored. The grandmother she knew was slowly vanishing, replaced by a frail, confused woman whose life was now meticulously managed by a man whose charming facade was cracking under the weight of his own inconsistencies. One afternoon, during a pre-arranged visit, Sarah arrived to find Eleanor unusually distraught. She was clutching a framed photograph, tears silently tracing paths down her wrinkled cheeks. He said I shouldn't bother you with this, dear," Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible. "But I don't understand." The photograph was of Eleanor's late husband, Sarah's grandfather, taken years ago. Eleanor had always cherished it. Now, it was scrawled across the glass with a thick marker, a crude "for sale" sign obscuring her husband's face. Arthur, emerging from the kitchen with a pitcher of lemonade, saw the photo. His charm wavered for a split second, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes, before he smoothly took the photo from Eleanor's trembling hands. "Oh, Grandma, I told you I'd take care of that. Just trying to help declutter, make things easier for you." He smiled at Sarah, a forced, practiced gesture that didn't reach his eyes. She gets a bit sentimental over old trinkets sometimes, bless her heart. The casual dismissal of Eleanor's distress, the audacity of marking a treasured possession with such disrespect, cemented Sarah's conviction that Arthur's intentions were far from benign. This wasn't merely about money anymore, it was about control, degradation, and the systematic dismantling of Eleanor's autonomy and dignity. Sarah watched Arthur place the defaced photograph on a shelf in a corner of the living room, almost as an afterthought, and the knot in her stomach tightened into a cold, hard stone. The sweet, cloying scent of Arthur's expensive cologne, once a pleasant detail, now felt suffocating, clinging to the air like a poisonous gas. Every instinct screamed at Sarah that she had to act, and soon before Eleanor was entirely consumed by this predatory presence. The quiet, insidious nature of Arthur's manipulation made it difficult to pinpoint, yet its effects were undeniably devastating, like a slow-acting poison weakening its victim from the inside out. Sarah knew that just watching was no longer an option. She had to find tangible proof, something undeniable, to expose the wolf in sheep's clothing before it was too late. The emotional toll on Eleanor was visible, and Sarah felt the weight of her grandmother's increasing vulnerability pressing down on her shoulders. The silent battles, The intercepted calls, the subtle shifts in Eleanor's demeanor, they all pointed to a carefully constructed cage, and Arthur held the key. Sarah's resolve hardened, turning her quiet desperation into a focused determination. The incident with the defaced photograph was a stark, undeniable symbol of Arthur's true nature, a cruel disregard for Eleanor's memories and emotional well-being. She returned to her grandmother's house the following week, ostensibly for a casual visit, but with a new pointed objective. Her eyes scanned the familiar surroundings, seeking anything out of place, any detail that might reveal the extent of Arthur's infiltration. It wasn't long before she found it, tucked discreetly amongst Eleanor's usual stack of utility bills and junk mail on the small writing desk in the sunroom. It was a thick, legal-looking envelope conspicuously sealed and addressed to Eleanor, but with Arthur's name faintly visible through the return address window of the law firm. A sinking feeling gripped Sarah as she carefully, almost reverently, slipped the document from its envelope, her fingers trembling slightly. What she found inside chilled her to the bone. It was a new will, prominently displayed, dated just 2 weeks prior. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat as she read the clauses, each sentence a hammer blow to her already fragile hope. The original will, which had designated Sarah as Eleanor's sole beneficiary and executor, had been completely superseded. This new document drastically altered the inheritance, redirecting the vast majority of Eleanor's considerable assets, including her cherished home, to Arthur. There were vague, almost insulting mentions of Sarah receiving a small, symbolic sum, barely enough to cover the legal fees associated with probate, described condescendingly as a token of appreciation for her past efforts. The language was formal, precise, and utterly ruthless. Eleanor's signature, though shaky, appeared to be present, witnessed by 2 individuals Sarah didn't recognize. This was it. This was the turning point, the concrete proof of Arthur's insidious plot, confirming her deepest, most terrifying fears. Eleanor's cognitive state, already compromised, had been expertly exploited. The blood rushed from Sarah's face, leaving her feeling lightheaded. She reread the document, searching for any loophole, any phrase that might offer a glimmer of hope, but there was none. It was meticulously crafted, designed to be airtight. Arthur had moved with chilling efficiency and precision. Her grandmother, the woman who had nurtured her, who had filled her childhood with laughter and wisdom, was now, by all legal appearances, being deliberately disinherited, her legacy stolen by a predator. A surge of protective fury, cold and sharp, ignited within Sarah. She carefully placed the will back in its envelope, her mind racing, already formulating her next move. The time for subtle investigation was over. This required direct, immediate action. Later that day, Sarah found Arthur in Eleanor's impeccably tended rose garden, pruning with an almost meditative focus, whistling a jaunty tune. He turned, a pleasant smile gracing his lips as he saw her approach, seemingly oblivious to the tempest brewing within her. His facade was as flawless as ever, the picture of a caring, devoted companion. "Arthur," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, holding up the envelope containing the nefarious document. "We need to talk about this." His eyes flickered to the envelope, and for the briefest fraction of a second the mask slipped. A shadow of annoyance, almost a flicker of triumph, crossed his features before he smoothly recomposed himself. He wiped his gloved hands on his apron, setting down the pruning shears with deliberate care. "Ah, the new will. Eleanor asked me to deliver it to the attorneys for her. She's been wanting to update her affairs for some time, simplify things, make sure everything is in order." His tone was infuriatingly calm, his delivery practiced perfection. "Simplify things?" Sarah countered, her voice rising slightly despite her attempt to remain composed. "Arthur, this document effectively disinherits Eleanor's only surviving family member and leaves almost everything to you. Are you seriously going to pretend this is a natural progression of her wishes? She gestured emphatically at the document, the corners of the envelope bending slightly under the force of her grip. Arthur sighed, a theatrical display of patience. Sarah, I understand your concern. Truly, I do. It must be upsetting for you, but Eleanor, bless her heart, has grown very fond of me. I've been here for her, caring for her when others were preoccupied. She sees me as family, a supportive presence in her later years. She wanted to ensure I was looked after. Given all I've done for her, it was her decision, purely her own. I simply facilitated her wishes, as any good friend would. He spread his hands in a gesture of magnanimous innocence, his gaze unwavering, almost challenging. I'm merely a benevolent caretaker, dear Sarah, nothing more. Eleanor is of sound mind, as far as the law is concerned. Her signature is on it, witnessed and notarized. There's nothing untoward here. His calm denial, the casual dismissal of her outrage, only fueled Sarah's anger. His words were a sickening performance, a carefully constructed narrative designed to deflect and gaslight. He had anticipated this confrontation, rehearsed his lines, and now he delivered them with chilling conviction. Eleanor is not of sound mind, Arthur. You know that. She's been in rapid decline. You've isolated her, manipulated her, and now you're trying to steal everything she's worked her entire life for. Her voice trembled, a mix of fury and fear for her grandmother. He simply offered a small, pitying smile. A daughter's grief, perhaps? Or a granddaughter's disappointment? It's a natural reaction, I suppose. But the law, Sarah, is quite clear. These are Eleanor's wishes. Defeated in this initial skirmish, but far from broken, Sarah retreated, the will clutched tightly in her hand. The next day, she wasted no time in consulting with a lawyer recommended by a friend, a kind woman who specialized in elder law. Sarah laid out the entire story, detailing Eleanor's cognitive decline, Arthur's growing influence, the isolation, and finally, the new will. She presented the document, her voice laced with barely suppressed emotion. The lawyer listened intently, nodding occasionally, her expression growing increasingly solemn. This is certainly troubling, Sarah, the lawyer said gravely, after examining the will and listening to the full account. However, challenging a will, especially one that appears to be legally sound on the surface, is an incredibly difficult undertaking. The burden of proof would be entirely on you to demonstrate undue influence or lack of testamentary capacity at the time of signing. Arthur's narrative, that he was simply fulfilling Eleanor's wishes as a devoted friend and caretaker, is a strong defense, unless you have concrete, irrefutable evidence of coercion, manipulation, or a clear medical diagnosis of severe cognitive impairment. At that exact time, proving your grandmother was not of sound mind when she signed this will become a formidable challenge. The law assumes capacity until proven otherwise, and Arthur, it seems, has meticulously ensured all his paperwork is in order. The lawyer's words, though gentle, felt like a heavy weight pressing down on Sarah, revealing the immense legal obstacles that lay ahead. The system, designed to protect, could also be exploited by those who understood its intricate weaknesses. Sarah understood with chilling clarity that direct confrontation without irrefutable evidence was futile. Arthur was too cunning, too practiced in his deceit. The lawyer's words echoed in her mind, emphasizing the formidable challenge of unproven allegations against a man who presented himself as a benevolent caretaker. This realization ignited within Sarah a fierce, almost obsessive drive to dissect every aspect of Arthur's presence in Eleanor's life. Her quest for truth transformed into a systematic, meticulous investigation, a desperate search for concrete proof that could dismantle Arthur's carefully constructed facade. She began by cataloging Eleanor's medical records, poring over every doctor's visit, every prescription, noting the dates and any changes in cognitive assessments. The progression of Eleanor's memory lapses, initially subtle, now appeared starkly evident when laid out chronologically. Sarah carefully cross-referenced these records with Arthur's increasing involvement, observing how his influence seemed to intensify precisely as Eleanor's lucidity waned. Next, her attention turned to Eleanor's financial statements. Every withdrawal, every transfer, every new account opened since Arthur's arrival was scrutinized. She spent countless hours hunched over spreadsheets, tracing the flow of money, cross-referencing dates with Arthur's known activities. The subtle discrepancies once dismissed as minor began to coalesce into a disturbing pattern. Larger sums were moved from Eleanor's long-standing, secure investments into new, often less transparent accounts. There were also unexplained expenditures, transactions that didn't align with Eleanor's usual frugal habits or documented needs. Arthur, always so quick to offer assistance, had subtly inserted himself into every financial decision, presenting each maneuver as being for Eleanor's benefit. Sarah meticulously documented everything, creating a digital fortress of information, each file meticulously labeled and backed up. She even began keeping a detailed journal, logging every interaction with Arthur, every conversation with Eleanor, every subtle shift in their dynamic. No detail was too small, no observation too insignificant, if it could contribute to building her case. Her search for evidence extended beyond official documents. Sarah rummaged through old photo albums not merely for sentimental reasons, but to potentially jog Eleanor's memory, to find a fragment of a past that Arthur had not contaminated. While sifting through a dusty box filled with sepia-toned memories, she stumbled upon a particular photograph. It depicted Eleanor and Arthur standing side by side on Eleanor's porch, bathed in the soft glow of a late afternoon sun. Eleanor was smiling, a genuine, albeit somewhat forced cheerfulness radiating from her face. Arthur, beside her, offered a wide, affable grin, his arm draped casually around her shoulders. At first glance, the picture seemed utterly innocent, a snapshot of a friendly, neighborly interaction, exactly the kind of image Arthur would have wanted to project. Sarah held the photograph, turning it over in her hands, her initial reaction mirroring the benign interpretation others would undoubtedly have. It was a pleasant image, a testament to the supposed bond between them. She placed it among the other collected documents, a piece of mundane evidence amidst the mounting financial and medical complexities. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, as Sarah continued her relentless investigation, poring over every scrap of information, the image of that photograph kept surfacing in her mind. It was a persistent, subtle whisper at the back of her thoughts, a visual anomaly that refused to be dismissed. She found herself repeatedly returning to it, picking it up, examining it under different lights, as if the paper itself held a secret waiting to be unveiled. She would hold it just inches from her eyes, then at arm's length, her artistic training instinctively searching for composition, for hidden nuances, for anything that deviated from the expected. The smiles were convincing, the setting idyllic, the overall impression one of harmonious companionship. Still something nagged at her, a faint dissonance in the visual symphony. It was like a single note played slightly off-key in an otherwise perfect melody. Arthur's posture, his expression, his proximity to Eleanor, all appeared perfectly normal within the context of a friendly photograph. There was no overt menace, no glaring red flags that would immediately alert a casual observer to anything amiss. Yet, that subtle feeling of unease persisted, a phantom itch she couldn't quite scratch. Sarah's artistic eye, honed by years of observing human forms and expressions, sensed a minute imbalance, a fleeting detail that defied logical explanation but stirred a deep-seated intuition. She found herself staring specifically at Arthur's hand on Eleanor's shoulder, a gesture that should have conveyed comfort and camaraderie. Everything else in the picture seemed to recede, leaving only a focused, almost microscopic examination of that single point of contact. The more she looked, the more the innocent picture began to feel less innocent. its charming surface slowly eroding under the weight of her intense, unwavering scrutiny. The photograph, that seemingly innocent snapshot of Eleanor and Arthur, had been burned into Sarah's memory since her discovery. She had revisited it countless times in her mind, turning it over and over like a puzzle piece that refused to fit. At first, it was just another picture in Eleanor's vast collection, a testament to a fleeting moment of connection. But now, after weeks of relentless investigation, after piecing together hints and whispers, after navigating Arthur's cunning deceptions, Sarah's artistic eye began to see something others might easily miss. It wasn't the smiles or the background, or even Arthur's generally affable demeanor that now caught her, but a single subtle detail that twisted her stomach into a fresh knot of dread. Arthur's hand. His hand resting on Eleanor's shoulder was subtly positioned with a possessive, almost gripping quality. It wasn't the loose, comforting gesture of a friendly neighbor, nor the gentle, supportive touch of a genuinely caring individual. Instead, his fingers were splayed just enough, his thumb pressing down with a faint, almost imperceptible pressure, asserting a silent dominance. It was a gesture of ownership, a nonverbal cue that spoke volumes about his true intentions, a deeply unsettling assertion of control. The way his knuckles were slightly whitened, the almost imperceptible tensing of his forearm, it all screamed of a calculated performance, a theatrical display of faux tenderness. This small detail, combined with everything else she had unearthed, sparked a new, terrifying theory in Sarah's mind, solidifying her mounting fears into a cold, hard certainty. This man wasn't just influencing Eleanor, he was claiming her piece by piece. The picture, once a benign snapshot, now felt like a chilling declaration. Driven by this disturbing revelation, Sarah plunged into a deeper investigation, her focus narrowing with an almost manic intensity. She spent countless hours online, delving into forums and academic papers, researching the insidious techniques used by con artists and manipulators, particularly those who preyed on the elderly. She devoured case studies of elder abuse, financial exploitation, and the subtle psychological warfare waged by predators against vulnerable individuals. What she discovered made her skin crawl. Online resources, legal journals, and even documentaries provided chilling examples of how manipulators carefully craft their image, isolating their victims, and slowly eroding their autonomy, often using seemingly innocuous gestures or subtle power plays. She learned about grooming tactics, the slow, deliberate process of building trust, creating dependence, and then systematically stripping away a person's independence and resources. The more she read, the more Arthur's behavior fit the textbook definition of a sophisticated predator. His charm, his helpfulness, his insistence on managing Eleanor's affairs, his gradual isolation of her from her friends and family. It was all part of a carefully orchestrated plan. The picture, with Arthur's subtly possessive hand, now seemed less like an oversight and more like a deliberate, almost arrogant signal. It was a nonverbal cue of ownership, a silent boast for anyone perceptive enough to see it. It was his signature, hidden in plain sight, on a masterpiece of manipulation. The chilling part was that she now recognized it not just as an artistic study, but as a chilling document of a crime in progress. The weight of this knowledge and the isolation of her struggle began to take its toll. She needed someone to believe her, someone with experience to confirm what her gut and her research were screaming. She thought of Detective Miller, a retired homicide detective, a close friend of her late father's, known for his sharp mind and unwavering sense of justice. She hadn't spoken to him in years, but a desperate situation called for desperate measures. She found his number through an old family address book and, with a trembling hand, made the call. Her heart pounded as the phone rang, each ring echoing the urgency of her quest. When Miller answered, his voice gruff but kind, Sarah launched into a torrent of words explaining everything from Eleanor's altered behavior to Arthur's suspicious charm, culminating in the chilling detail of the photograph. She described the new will, the financial discrepancies, the isolation, and finally the almost imperceptible grip of Arthur's hand on Eleanor's shoulder, explaining her interpretation with a passion that bordered on desperation. Miller listened patiently, interrupting only occasionally with a concise question. "You're saying this photograph, Sarah, it's not just a snapshot. You see a pattern, a message in it?" he asked, his voice low and thoughtful. After she had finished her breathless explanation, "You see a signal of control, an assertion of dominance disguised as a gentle gesture?" "Yes, Detective Miller," she affirmed, her voice steadier now that she was finally articulating her deepest fears to someone who seemed to understand. "It's like a predator marking its territory. It's subtle, almost invisible, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's the culmination of every red flag, every inconsistency. It paints a picture of his true character, his insidious intentions." "Interesting," Miller mused, a hint of professional curiosity entering his tone. "Send me the photograph, Sarah, and everything else you've got. Send me the financial statements, the medical records, even your own notes on Arthur's interactions with your grandmother. This isn't a homicide case, but the patterns of human behavior, the exploitation of the vulnerable, they often leave similar trails, just different kinds of evidence." He paused, and Sarah could almost hear the gears turning in his experienced mind. "You've done well to observe this, Sarah. Most people would dismiss it. But your artistic eye, your intuition, it seems to have caught something significant. You might have found the piece of evidence that changes everything." A wave of relief washed over Sarah, so potent it almost brought her to her knees. She had an ally, someone believed her. She wasn't alone in this fight anymore. The heavy burden of her secret investigation, the gnawing anxiety that had been her constant companion, began to lift, replaced by a surge of renewed determination. Detective Miller's calm, measured response, his recognition of the subtle clues she had painstakingly gathered, validated her struggle and reignited her hope. The fight was far from over, but now she had a seasoned guide by her side, someone who understood the dark corners of human nature and how to navigate them. The photograph, once a tormenting enigma, was now a weapon. Armed with newfound resolve and Detective Miller's support, Sarah meticulously organized her evidence. She printed out the photograph, now heavily annotated with circles and arrows highlighting Arthur's hand and Eleanor's subtly recoiled posture. She compiled the stacks of financial statements, pointing out the suspicious withdrawals and transferred assets. The medical records detailing Eleanor's rapid cognitive decline were placed prominently. Her own journal, filled with dates and times of Arthur's isolating behaviors and Eleanor's increasingly confused remarks, served as a chronological testament to his deceit. Miller arranged for a formal meeting, not a casual chat, but a structured interview where Sarah would present her case in a legally sound manner, with Miller present as an observer. The day of the confrontation arrived, thick with tension. They met in a neutral conference room at a local community center, a space deliberately chosen to avoid any intimidation from Arthur's usual domain at Eleanor's house. Arthur walked in, impeccably dressed, a picture of polite concern, his usual charming smile plastered on his face. He seemed genuinely perplexed as to why he was there, radiating an air of injured innocence. Eleanor was not present. Miller had advised against it, fearing it would cause her undue distress and potentially compromise the investigation. A family law attorney, a stern woman named Ms. Davies, sat beside Sarah, her gaze unblinking and analytical. "Mr. Peterson," Ms. Davies began, her voice crisp and devoid of emotion, "we've asked you here today to discuss some serious discrepancies regarding Ms. Eleanor Vance's financial and personal affairs." Arthur maintained his composed facade, offering a practiced, sympathetic shrug. "Of course. Anything I can do to help Eleanor. She's a dear friend, almost family. I've merely been assisting her as she's grown a little forgetful. He cast a glance at Sarah, a subtle glint of accusation in his eyes, implying Sarah was exaggerating. Sarah, however, was no longer the hesitant, second-guessing young woman. She was Eleanor's fiercely protective granddaughter, now armed with facts and backed by professionals. She laid out the photograph first, sliding it across the polished table towards Arthur. This picture, Arthur. It was taken shortly after you befriended my grandmother. Arthur picked it up, his smile wavering slightly. Yes, a lovely day. Eleanor was quite happy. Look closer at your hand, Arthur, Sarah pressed, her voice steady. On her shoulder. It's not a comforting touch, is it? It's a grip, a possessive one. It's how you've treated her, isn't it, as something to be claimed, controlled. Arthur scoffed, a brittle sound. That's absurd. You're reading far too much into a simple gesture. It's an innocent photograph. He tried to dismiss it, pushing the picture back across the table. Ms. Davies intervened. Mr. Peterson, while the photographic interpretation is compelling, it is merely contextual. What concerns us are the financial transactions involved. She then presented the statements pointing to the large sums transferred from Eleanor's accounts to an offshore numbered account within weeks of Arthur becoming Eleanor's financial advisor. Can you explain these transfers? Arthur's composure began to fray at the edges. A bead of sweat appeared on his temple. Those were investments, perfectly legitimate. Eleanor wanted to diversify her portfolio. I merely facilitated her wishes. His voice was becoming strained, losing its smooth cadence. And her signature on these documents, Ms. Davies continued, presenting copies of the new will, and several power of attorney forms, all heavily favoring Arthur. All dated after Eleanor's primary physician noted significant signs of advanced dementia, documents that completely disinherit Sarah, her only living relative, in your favor. She made her own choices. Arthur practically spat, his facade cracking completely. Sarah never cared for her. I was the one there. I was the one who looked after her when Sarah was too busy with her art. His true resentment flared, momentarily eclipsing the charming persona. He stood up, pacing the small room. You're all ganging up on me. This is defamation. I've done nothing but help that ungrateful old woman. His voice rose, betraying his carefully maintained calm. Detective Miller, who had been silently observing, now spoke for the first time, his voice low and authoritative. Mr. Peterson, we also have testimony from several of Eleanor's former friends and caregivers. They describe how you systematically isolated her, preventing them from visiting, intercepting phone calls, and even instructing them to tell Eleanor she was too busy for company. They also attest to Eleanor's confusion and distress during those times, directly contradicting your claim that she was making her own choices. Arthur stumbled, his face paling. He tried to interrupt, but Miller held up a hand. Furthermore, Mr. Peterson, Miller continued, his words slow and deliberate, we've found a prior will, dated 5 years ago, notarized and clearly stating Eleanor's intent to leave her entire estate to her granddaughter, Sarah. A will that was inexplicably lost shortly after you entered Eleanor's life. That's irrelevant, Arthur blustered, but his voice lacked conviction. He fidgeted, his eyes darting wildly. Then Ms. Davies delivered the final crushing blow. Mr. Peterson, we have also obtained a signed affidavit from a former colleague of yours, a Ms. Evelyn Harding. She states that during your time at a financial firm in Arizona, you were investigated internally for similar practices, coercing elderly clients into altering their wills and investments. The investigation was dropped due to lack of concrete evidence at the time, but Ms. Harding, having seen your recent activities, felt compelled to come forward with her own detailed account of your modus operandi. Arthur froze, his face a mask of utter defeat. The room fell silent, the weight of his unraveling deception pressing in. The charming facade shattered irrevocably, revealing the predatory emptiness beneath. He slowly sank back into his chair, the fight draining from him. his carefully constructed world collapsing with the undeniable truth. The meticulous work of Detective Miller, combined with Sarah's painstakingly assembled dossier, began to dismantle Arthur's carefully constructed facade. The legal process, slow and often frustrating, unfolded with a relentless determination that mirrored Sarah's own. Armed with the irrefutable evidence of financial irregularities, the timeline of Eleanor's cognitive decline, and crucially, the expert testimony analyzing the subtle psychological manipulation captured in the infamous photograph, the authorities moved swiftly. Arthur, stripped of his charm and confronted with the cold, hard facts, found his denials increasingly hollow. The new will, proven to have been signed under duress, and when Eleanor lacked the full capacity to understand its implications, was swiftly invalidated. The web of deceit he had spun around Eleanor, isolating her from her family and plundering her resources, was systematically unraveled. Justice, though it sometimes feels elusive, ultimately prevailed. Arthur was arrested, charged with elder abuse, fraud, and financial exploitation. The court proceedings, though painful and public, served as a catharsis for Sarah and a stark warning for others who might contemplate similar predatory actions. His sentencing brought a sense of closure, though the emotional scars of the ordeal would undoubtedly linger for years to come. With Arthur no longer a threat, Eleanor's world slowly began to mend. Her financial affairs, once a chaotic tangle of suspicious transactions and missing funds, were painstakingly restored by a team of dedicated legal and financial professionals working closely with Sarah. It was a long journey, replete with complex paperwork and frustrating bureaucratic hurdles, but every reclaimed dollar, every closed fraudulent account, felt like a small victory. More importantly, Eleanor was finally free. Free from the insidious whispers, the manipulative suggestions, and the suffocating control that had become her daily reality. She moved into a specially designed assisted living facility, one chosen for its compassionate staff, stimulating environment, and robust protections against exploitation. Here, surrounded by genuine care and a community of peers, she began to reclaim fragments of her former self. Her memory remained fragile, a constant testament to the toll Arthur's actions had taken, but her laughter returned, lighter and more frequent, a melody Sarah had feared she might never hear again. Sarah often visited, bringing photo albums and sharing stories of their past, not to force recollection, but to simply share moments of joy and connection. She would sit with Eleanor in the sun-drenched common room, holding her grandmother's hand, feeling the warmth of their renewed bond. The sense of guilt that had plagued Sarah, the agonizing question of whether she should have acted sooner, finally began to recede, replaced by a quiet pride in her unwavering vigilance. The photograph, the seemingly innocent image that had ignited Sarah's final desperate push for truth, now hung in a small frame on her desk. It was no longer a symbol of unease or a harbinger of dread. Instead, it served as a powerful reminder of several profound lessons. It spoke to the insidious nature of manipulation, how easily vulnerability could be exploited, and the importance of looking beyond the surface, of trusting one's intuition even when faced with seemingly harmless appearances. It was a testament to the power of observation, to the way an artist's eye, trained to see the subtle nuances of human expression and posture, could uncover a truth hidden in plain sight. But more than anything, the picture had become a poignant emblem of Sarah's love for Eleanor. It represented her fierce determination to protect her grandmother, to fight for justice, and to restore the dignity that had been so cruelly taken from her. The subtle grip of Arthur's hand on Eleanor's shoulder now served, ironically, as a constant prompt for Sarah to remain vigilant, not just for Eleanor, but for all vulnerable individuals susceptible to such predators. It underscored the profound responsibility each of us bears to look out for one another, to question what seems amiss, and to never underestimate the importance of even the smallest detail. Their bond, once strained by suspicion and fear, was now stronger, forged in the crucible of adversity. The ordeal had been harrowing, a journey through a dark and unsettling landscape, but they had emerged. Eleanor, though irrevocably changed, found peace and comfort in the twilight of her years, and Sarah, forever marked by the experience, carried with her a newfound wisdom, a deepened sense of empathy, and an unshakable resolve to ensure that Eleanor's story, a story of quiet resilience against insidious evil, would stand as a beacon of hope and a warning for all. The quiet strength derived from their enduring love, a bond that transcended the pain and deceit, shone brightly, illuminating the path forward, a future built on truth, care, and unwavering connection between a grandmother and her devoted granddaughter. If you found this story compelling and a stark reminder of the hidden dangers lurking in plain sight, please like this video. Your engagement helps us bring more vital narratives like this to light. Share it with your friends and family because awareness is the first step towards protection. And most importantly, consider subscribing to our channel and hitting that notification bell for more thought-provoking and cautionary tales that delve into the complexities of human nature. You can also click on the video displayed next to this one to watch our latest featured content and continue your journey through our collection of untold stories.